I thank you in advance for that. And I thank both candidates who have bought into the heavy programme outlined for them and have travelled the length and breadth of the United Kingdom to outline their respective positions to the membership. We are grateful to them for diligently undertaking their responsibilities in that connection. I would also like to thank Brandon Lewis and his team at Central Office in London for their hard work in putting together at short notice the logistics of this considerable operation. And last, but certainly not least, thanks to Mark McInnes and his team from Central Office in Edinburgh, who have been coordinating this particular event. Now, the sting in the tail, ladies and gentlemen, is that leadership elections are costly events. The ballot papers are on their way to you. There will be no raffle tonight, you'll be surprised to hear. But I know that the Treasurer would wish you to make a contribution when exercising your vote. All contributions will go to the Scottish Party, or so I've told Brandon Lewis anyway, and will be gratefully accepted. And that is the sting in the tail. I do hope that this will be a meaningful and informative evening for all of us, as we hear from the two right honourable gentlemen on their vision and Conservative ideals and their passion for preservation of the Union. On that note, and without further ado, can I pass you over to the very honourable Colin Mackay. Thank you very much.
So I'm your chairman for tonight. Rab's your chairman in Scotland. But there's another one here as well, because you can never have too many chairmen. So please welcome Brandon Lewis.
Good evening. I think the chairman fit into the classic one of you wait a long time and then three come along at once. Look, it's fantastic to be here in Perth, not least of all because here in Scotland, obviously, we in the Conservative Party, the Conservative and Unionist Party, have to always remember that we must be always vigilant to the fact that we are in government because of the success that you had here with our great Scottish Conservative members of Parliament in Scotland. And that is thanks to the phenomenal efforts that all of you and our friends and the rest of our Conservative family here in Scotland put in 2017. And we have got great members of Parliament from Scotland now, but we want more. And one of the decisions we've all got to take when we cast our ballots is to ensure that we have a leader of the party and a Prime Minister who can make sure that we turn those 21 votes here where we are sitting into a Conservative seat as well, and others. And it was important to me, and I think that Rab makes the point very well. Having been as myself, not just chairman of the Conservative and Unionist Party, but for a long time a volunteer, an activist, a councillor before being a member of Parliament, and your chairman, that we in the party had a chance to hear from, and you get a chance to see and assess our great candidates. And that's why I think it was right that we did what you in the Voluntary Party wanted and made sure we visited not just every region, but every nation of our United Kingdom. And that's what we've done. And that's a great credit to everybody involved, the team from CCHQ and our candidates and their teams who are travelling all over the country and to all of our nations. So you get that chance tonight to hear from them about their vision for the future, not just of our party, but the future vision for our country that our next leader will be taking forward. A positive vision that shows that we in the Conservative Party have the ideas to take our country forward and to be successful. I hope you enjoy this evening. Your questions will be the ones that they'll be answering once they're finished with Colin's grilling as well. Enjoy it. Look forward to seeing the outcome in a few weeks' time. And thank you for joining us this evening. Have a good night.
Thank you. Now, Jeremy Hunt is first up tonight. Before he gives you his campaign spiel, he has a video prepared.
The most striking quality about Jeremy Hunt was his unwavering commitment to get results. I think perhaps part of that is to do with his background in business. No matter what the obstacles were, he was prepared to push through them. He wanted to get results.
I've seen him deliver on the things that matter most to the British people. He has credibility from all sides. I trust him on Brexit.
I've known Jeremy for 40 years, and about 25 of those years we worked together, setting up various businesses. Those early days were absolutely about his determination and grit. He would never give up.
When I first met Jeremy, I realised he was a man who actually was committed to making a difference.
In 2008, I lost my baby son Joshua as a consequence of serious failures in his care during my campaign to kind of uncover the truth about what happened. I was struggling to be heard, and Jeremy really listened and treated me as a grieving dad rather than a troublemaker. I knew that this was somebody who was going to change things.
My mum died quite tragically in poor care in Mid-Staffs. Jeremy was incredibly kind. He saw the bereaved daughter behind the campaigner, and he saw it was people that mattered.
I have known Jeremy Hunt since the early 2000s. He and his business partner started funding the education of children living with HIV in our community-based programme. Jeremy's generosity was sensed by us all.
That desire to make a difference really drives him. It's never been about him. It's always been about what he can do to help others.
The work he's done will save the lives of countless babies, and other families will not have to go through the kind of pain that we did.
People often underestimate Jeremy because he comes across as being such a polite and generous and nice person, and he is. But I remember hearing him warning the EU not to mistake British politeness for British weakness, and I thought that just about sums him up.
I was pessimistic about the London Olympics. I thought, we could mess this up. I remember talking to Jeremy in the build-up. He said, no, we're a great country. We can do this if we have the right mindset. The delivery was outstanding, but also had this element of fun. I know that Jeremy was very involved in getting that balance right.
He believes in Britain as a force for good in the world. He's shown strong values at the FCO and consistently good judgment.
Negotiating, toughing it out when things get really difficult, keeping going, having a vision. Those are the skills that we need in a Prime Minister.
He's a unifier. He's somebody who can reach out to different groups of people.
My dad always taught me that politics should be about making a difference in ordinary people's lives. And Jeremy made a huge difference to our lives. He gave us hope, and that for me was the main thing, that he gave us hope in some very, very dark days.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It is fantastic to be in Scotland. My fourth time here in this campaign, but my first time in the most marginal seat in the country, which we are going to win next time. And I want to start with a thank you. And not just for the delicious fish and chips that I had at Peterhead, the freshest I've ever had. Not just for looking after my great-aunt Betty, 99 years old, and still lives very happily in Aberdeen. I want to thank you because I would not be standing here as Foreign Secretary without Scottish Conservatives. Those 12 seats that you won us at the last election gave this country a Conservative government when we needed it the most. And if there are two words to describe why that happened, they are Ruth and they are Davidson. And I am more proud than you will ever know to have Ruth's endorsement in this election campaign. And I want to thank her, I want to thank Jackson, and I want to thank every one of you for what you have done for our country. So, I'm standing here this evening because I want to tell you what I want to change as our Prime Minister.
And to govern is to choose. And I want to tell you about 3 priorities that I have for our country. But we can't do any of them until we deliver Brexit. And when it comes to no deal, there isn't a big difference between me and Boris. Both of us want a deal. Both of us are prepared to leave without a deal if it's the only way to go. But I have announced special support, having met the fishing community, farmers in Scotland and across the United Kingdom, to make sure that if we do have to weather a no-deal Brexit, every possible support is put in place. But the difference is which is the Prime Minister that we trust to go to Brussels who could negotiate a deal. And if you choose me, I'll be the first Prime Minister we've ever had with a background as an entrepreneur. Now, just out of interest, how many people here have set up their own business? Just put your hands up if you've set up. Just look around, because I ask this question everywhere I go, and this is our Conservative family. So many people who've taken the risk to set up their own business, create jobs, create wealth for our country. And what is it that entrepreneurs do? Every day of our existence, we negotiate. We know not to blink. We know to be able to walk away. We know we need trust with the other side. And that's what I'll do. I'll negotiate a deal for our country. And when we do, what amazing opportunities await. My first priority as a business person is to fire up our economy. You know, we have in our country the top universities in Europe, some of the very best in the world. In Scotland, you've got Edinburgh, Glasgow, St Andrews, many more. We also have more technology entrepreneurs. Down the road in Dundee, you've got all the gaming industry, and you put those together, and we could be the world's next Silicon Valley. And that matters, because in 10 years' time, people aren't going to be talking about Brexit. They're going to be talking about artificial intelligence, driverless cars, our Amazon deliveries coming by drone. We could set up our country for the 21st century. And in any trade talks, the EU will need us every bit as much as we need them. So that's the first of my 3 priorities. Now I want to tell you the second, because I am the Foreign Secretary who wants our country to walk tall in the world. And that means a lot of things. One of them, putting more money into defence, and I'll increase the proportion of our GDP beyond 2% of defence. But you can't do that. But you can't walk tall in the world as a divided kingdom. You can only do it as a united kingdom. My dad was in the Navy, and he was posted to Rosyth for a couple of years. I had 2 very happy years of my childhood up here. And thanks to him, I have Welsh blood, and to my mum, I have Irish blood. I'm a unionist to my core. And I say this, as Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, I will never allow our union to be broken up. And if the First Minister of Scotland asks me for a second independence referendum, I will muster up my British politeness and I will say no. And I'll say to her that just as I will hold her as First Minister to account for her job, which is to look after the roads, the police officers, the schools and the hospitals in Scotland, so she can hold me to account for my job as Prime Minister of the United Kingdom to defend our precious union with every drop of blood I have. And there's one last priority. I promise you this, I won't provoke another general election in our country until we've got more young people to vote Conservative. We can't be the party of aspiration unless the most aspirational people in our country are supporting us. But there's another reason. Getting young people to support us is the best way to deal with the twin evils of socialism and nationalism. A Labour Party led by a man that has turned it into the most ruthless, dangerous, anti-Western, anti-British, hard-left cabal we've ever seen in British politics, and a nationalist party that is the most bullying, divisive, duplicitous, anti-business government that Scotland has ever seen. We must stop them both, and we will. So friends, get this wrong, and we will have no Conservative government, maybe no Conservative party, maybe no United Kingdom. But get it right, and we will deliver Brexit, unite our party, unite our great country, unleash its potential, and send Corbyn and Sturgeon packing. Thank you very much.
Mr Hunt, just to get on record from the absolute outset, where do you stand on the Barnett formula, the funding formula between Scotland and the rest of the UK?
It stays.
For how long?
While I'm Prime Minister.
Well, you're Prime Minister. What about the fiscal framework, which is up for renegotiation in 2021?
Well, I will not do anything that jeopardises our union. So I'm not saying that any of these formulas are perfect, but my priority when discussing any of them is to protect our union.
Ruth Davidson's backing you for leadership, as you mentioned, but you're our third choice. It's not exactly a ringing endorsement, is it?
Well, there's only two choices at this stage, and I'm the one, so I'm very grateful to Ruth.
So basically you're getting her anyone but Boris support?
You can draw your own conclusions,
Right,
but Ruth Davidson is going to be voting for Jeremy Hunt.
What makes the UK so attractive to Scotland?
Well, I think it's very straightforward. We are, as the United Kingdom, one of the most amazing countries in the planet. We have less than 1% of the world's land mass, less than 1% of the world's population, and yet alongside America, we have done more than any other country to shape the modern world. And the secret of that genius has been the magic you get when you put the talents of the four nations of the United Kingdom together. It's an incredible success story for all of us, and that's what I want to protect.
But there's a lot of people in Scotland that don't feel that the Conservative government at Westminster listens to them. Scotland didn't vote to leave the EU, but we are leaving the EU as part of the UK. A lot of people in Scotland would rather stay in the EU than stay in the UK.
I understand that, but we took that decision as a United Kingdom, and the MPs of the United Kingdom promised our people that we would respect that referendum result. My constituency in the home county, South West Surrey, also voted to remain. But we didn't vote as constituencies or as nations, we voted as a United Kingdom, and so we have to respect that result. But we also have to answer the question, how are we going to bring the whole country together after we leave the European Union? And the way to do that is not to cancel Brexit or to have a second referendum, because that would just lead to further division. The way to do that is to deliver a Brexit that works for the 48% who wanted to remain. And the way to do that is to show them that the Conservative Brexit we deliver isn't going to change the fundamental character of our country. We are going to remain an open, outward-looking, progressive, tolerant country. It's not going to be somewhere that pulls the shutters up and says foreigners not welcome. And if we can show the people who voted to remain in the EU, that fundamental character hasn't changed. In Scotland and throughout the UK, I think we will bring everyone together and we will have a settlement that works post-Brexit.
But when you talk about the Conservatives being complacent about the Union, doesn't that just illustrate the point that it doesn't matter that Scotland's majority voted to stay in the EU? You don't care.
Well, I think it's not just the Conservatives. I think that our country has been complacent about the Union. I mean, in the run-up to the...
Which country?
The United Kingdom has been complacent. I mean, because long before we were talking about Brexit, we had that 2014 independence referendum, which was a very scary moment for many of us, including the people in this room. And I don't think we had thought hard enough about how to protect our precious union then. And I think since then, we have also been complacent. So what I'm promising as Prime Minister is that we will make sure we have in place a long-term plan to protect those bonds that join us together, that look at the economic bonds, the social bonds, the cultural bonds, the bonds between families that are so strong between Scotland and the rest of the UK. And I think, you know, as I said, if I'm asked as Prime Minister for a second independence referendum, the answer will be no. But we also have to prepare for the fact that at some stage in our lifetimes, that referendum could happen, not least if Corbyn came to power. And I want us to be properly prepared in every way we can.
So when could it happen?
Well...
Because you've said no, not under your Prime Ministership. So
yes.
You're ruling it out, regardless of what happens in the next general election?
Well, I'll tell you why I'm ruling it out,
like
Colin.
Scottish election?
Well, I'll tell you why, Colin. Because I'm listening to the people of Scotland, including many people who voted for independence, who do not want the divisiveness of another referendum. It split up families, friendships. It was incredibly damaging for Scottish society, and there are many, many people in Scotland who say never, never again.
But there's many people who don't say that. There's many people who want another referendum. Now, in the Scottish Parliament at the moment, there is a majority in favour of another referendum. You're going to deny them that, even though you can't get your constitutional change through at Westminster.
Because the Scottish Parliament is full, unfortunately, of nationalist MPs
because
who
people,
are not...
hang on, that's because people voted for them.
Let me answer the question. It's full of nationalist MPs who, on the question of an independence referendum, are not listening to their constituents. And the last poll I read, nearly 3/4 of Scots, that includes many people who voted for independence, don't want to see another independence referendum in the next few years.
You didn't see the panel base poll the other week then, which, to give you a point, 48% said they didn't want one in the next few years, but 51% said they wanted it to take place during the Brexit negotiations.
Well, I'm just...
So there's a different poll for you.
Yeah, indeed, and there are lots of polls. Poll. There are lots and lots of polls, Colin, but what I would say is that when I talk to people in Scotland, I don't think they want to go through that again.
What about...
I don't think that's what the people here want to happen either.
So you would, even if there was a majority for the SNP at the next Scottish Parliament election, you would still say no?
I have been very clear. Let me tell you why that is.
But is that what you're being very clear about? You would still say no, even if they got a majority?
Well, I'm very much enjoying this discussion, but can I answer your question before you ask the next
one?
If
you do, it would be nice.
The reason that I would say no to another independence referendum was because on all sides of that debate in 2014, including the SNP, they said this was a decision for a generation. This was not a decision people were going to come back to. This was a decision forever. And so we have to honour that referendum result. And by the way, that is exactly the same reason why I don't believe we should have a second referendum on Brexit. And I'm one of the people who voted to remain in the EU. In a democracy, which is a representative democracy that makes most decisions by sending MPs and MSPs to Westminster and Holyrood, on those rare occasions where you say we're going to take the decision away from those representatives and give it to the people, then you have to do what the people say. That is the meaning of democracy.
So you've hardened your position on no second independence referendum, because a few weeks ago you were having your three ideas, your three suggestions. One of them was that if Nicola Sturgeon did get a majority, the SNP did get a majority, you would have to consider giving them a Section 30 order.
Well, I am...
So you've hardened your position.
I am absolutely clear that I will not be a Prime Minister who allows the breakup of the Union. And I think in this leadership contest, it's very, very important for everyone here and everyone in Scotland to know that.
So which is most important, the Union or Brexit?
Well, I've answered that question before. I've said the Union comes before everything, but we can have both, and we must have both, because we are a great democracy. And as Foreign Secretary, when I go around the world, I've noticed that other countries have a whole lot more respect for us than sometimes we seem to have for ourselves. And one of the reasons for that is because we are one of the oldest and most robust democracies in the world. And what everyone knows is when we had that Brexit referendum, the political establishment, including people like me, supported Remain. And they're looking at us and they're saying, you know, this really is the ultimate test of a democracy. If you, the ruling guys, are being asked to do something you actually didn't want to do. And they want to see if we're going to pass that test. And no one I meet has any doubt that we will make a tremendous success of Brexit. They're a bit bemused that we're making such a meal of it at the moment, but they know that we can make it a great success. So we've got to get on with it, make it a success, and show the world that we are truly that great British democracy.
But if it came to a choice, you'd choose the Union over Brexit?
I don't think it needs to
be
that choice. Well, I've told you, we can deliver both. And we can do that, firstly, by maximising our chances of getting a deal, by sending someone to Brussels who can negotiate that deal. But secondly, if it is no deal, making sure that we mitigate the impact for the farming communities, the fishing community, for small businesses throughout Scotland and throughout the UK.
Now I'm going to have to move on to questions from the audience you'll be relieved to hear, although
they
might give you a tougher time than I certainly have. Now, I'm going to take a couple of questions of people who have emailed them in advance, but I'll also take some contributions from the floor initially on something that's connected. Now, the first question is from Daniel Granger. Where are you, Daniel? If you can make yourself to the microphone just behind you. And the next question is going to come from Graham Simpson, MSP. Where are you, Graham? If you make yourself to the, get to the microphone down there, we'll hear from Daniel first. Then, after we've had the answer, we'll come to you. And then we'll maybe take some contributions from the floor after you've heard some of them. So, Daniel.
Where's Daniel?
Good evening.
Where's Daniel?
He's up the back.
Hi, Jeremy.
Daniel, hi.
My question's about immigration. Following the UK's exit from the European Union on the 31st of October or whenever, as you've said, how will you ensure the UK has access to the skills we need, and do you support greater immigration and trade opportunities with the Commonwealth, more precisely the CANZUK nations, Canada, Australia, UK, and that group?
Well, Daniel, I think there's no doubt that the reason that a lot of people voted for Brexit was to bring down immigration levels and specifically to get parliamentary control over immigration levels. And we must respect that. But the way you reduce migration levels, and I'm very conscious that in Scotland there's particular needs to attract labour into the Scottish market to help Scottish businesses expand. The way you bring down migration levels is by raising the skill levels of our own people. And when I was Health Secretary, I was very conscious, Health Secretary in England, I was very conscious of the brilliant work done by doctors and nurses that came from overseas, including 20,000 EU nurses, 10,000 EU doctors. And the NHS in England, just as in Scotland, would literally have fallen over without their brilliant help, their amazing people. But I also thought it was sad that we didn't train more people from our own country to do these jobs, because there's huge waiting lists to get into medical school. So I increased, biggest increase actually ever of doctors and nurses, 25% increase in the numbers we train. Now it takes a long time, 7 years to train a doctor, 3 years to train a nurse. So it won't feed through for a while, but that is the way you bring down migration levels. I will be a Prime Minister with a pro-business migration policy that understands the needs of all four parts of our UK, but I think that's the way you address it.
Would you consider devolving immigration powers, as the Scottish Government has asked for, particularly for farming, fishing and tourism industries in Scotland who are struggling to get people?
Well, I'd like to say that with me as Prime Minister, they won't need to ask that because they can be confident there'll be an immigration policy that responds to the needs of Scotland. But somehow, knowing Nicola Sturgeon, I don't think that will quite stop her asking.
Well, the policy in universities didn't. The policy in postgraduates didn't extend to Scotland. No Scottish universities got that.
Which policy?
The policy in postgraduates on graduates from university. Scotland didn't get anything out of that. Well, it went to English universities.
As it happens, when it comes to students, international students in our universities, another brilliant thing, by the way, about our country, that our universities attract the brightest talent from all over the world. And I say that as someone who married one of those international students. I'm particularly grateful that we had one international, was it China or Japan? Someone will know the answer to that question here. But I am actually sympathetic to the idea of better post-study work rights for international students, because I think that could make a valuable contribution to our economy.
Take another question from Graham Simpson.
Evening. Your rival in this competition has said of the Barnett formula that it produces deeply inequitable outcomes and is a system of amazing political antiquity by which the English taxpayer sends about £20 billion every year to Scotland as a kind of present. What do you make of that?
I'm pleased I was never a journalist. Because, look, I'm not someone who will say that every aspect of the Barnett formula works perfectly, but I think once you start to unpick something like that, it is a gift for Nicola Sturgeon, and I don't think we should go there.
Okay, where's John Tyler? John, if you want to make your way down to the microphone, and where's Morag Pollock? Morag, if you want to make your way to a microphone. Now, I'll be looking round during these ones. If anybody else wants to come in, if you stick your hand up, I'll indicate at the next point. John.
Yeah, good evening. If I were to display a Union Jack up here in Scotland, there's a good chance it and or my property would be vandalised in a day or two. Not so if it was the saltire. What action do you propose to heal the open, nasty divisions we have in this country?
Mr. Hunt.
Well, John, I want to start by thanking you and everyone in this room for bravely standing up for the Union through the incredible bullying there was in the run-up to the 2014 independence referendum. And I think that it was totally unacceptable what we saw. And the only way that we can deal with that is to have a constitutional settlement for Scotland that is secure and stable within the United Kingdom. I personally think that there has been this constant, never-ending discussion about the transfer of powers, and I think we need some stability in that settlement, and we need some tolerance. And I think that just as you are proud to be associated as a Scot with a saltire, I think we need to be clear that it is a basic Scottish virtue, just as it is a British virtue to be a tolerant nation. And that is what we should always say.
John, just very quickly, do you think the Union's at risk, as Theresa May, Gordon Brown have said? Do you think it's at greater risk now than ever?
No, I don't.
You don't?
No, I don't.
Do you think? Well, in that case, let me ask Mr. Hunt, do you think politicians are overplaying the risk to the Union at the moment?
When something is precious, you should never be complacent about it. And that goes for your husband or your wife, and it goes for the constituent parts of the United Kingdom. And so that's why I think we should always be alive to the risks to the Union, but also confident about its great, great future.
Well, what level of risk do you think there is to the Union at the moment? Theresa May was talking it up yesterday in Stirling.
If we get things wrong, then of course those risks increase.
A no-deal Brexit's what she said would be wrong.
Well, that's why if we end up with a no-deal Brexit, we've got to take every possible measure to prepare and support businesses in Scotland and other parts of the UK.
But even though she says that talks up the risk to the union, increases the risk to the union, you're still not willing to say no to a no deal?
No, because we are a democracy, and it wouldn't solve anything to put Brexit at risk. It would create further divisions, further instability, and I think that's what Nicola Sturgeon would want.
Okay, let's go to Morag Pollock, and I'm looking for a hand, see if anybody else wants to contribute at this point. Yeah, if you want to make your way to the microphone, if you want to make your way to the microphone behind you, that would be great. We'll come to you both next. Morag?
I want to know what proposals you have to break the Brexit deadlock on the Irish border. You've probably answered this already, how you'll protect the union.
Okay, thank you, Morag. Well, let's go to the detail of the Irish border. I mean, just as I am passionate about our union when it comes to Scotland, so too with Northern Ireland, where I was earlier this week. And if you think it's tough being a Conservative in Scotland, try being a Conservative in Northern Ireland. They are a very, very brave group of people. That border must remain a soft border without border infrastructure. It's one of the basic preconditions for the maintenance of peace following the Belfast Good Friday Agreement. And all sides in the Brexit debate in the House of Commons agree with that. The solution, which was this thing called the backstop, essentially meant that we would have had to accept EU customs tariffs until such time as the EU decided to give us permission not to accept those tariffs. And that is why it didn't get through the House of Commons, and in my judgment would never get through the House of Commons. So to answer Morag's question, I will not propose a deal to the EU that can't get through the House of Commons. And that's why I've said on my Brexit negotiating team, I would have the DUP, the ERG, which are the Brexit purists in the Conservative Party, Scottish and Welsh Conservatives, so that with that group of people, the EU could have confidence that anything we propose can command a majority in the House of Commons. And I think we need to find a technology-led solution, what the Germans call invisible borders, which I think is perfectly possible to do with the technology that we have today. It'll take a while to get it up and running, but I think that is the solution. And I think the EU, they like the backstop, partly because they like the idea of us staying in the customs union. I think they must now know that that won't get through the House of Commons. So I think if we have a reasonable discussion with them, it should be possible to negotiate a different way to solve that issue.
But you're not giving up on no deal, and you can't get that through the Commons.
Well, that is why I...
You said you wouldn't come up with a deal that you couldn't get through the Commons. No deal wouldn't get through the Commons.
Could I just answer your first question,
Please
Colin?
do.
Thank you. The reason, because of the risk of no deal being taken off the table by the House of Commons, that's the reason why I haven't made that hard do-or-die commitment to the 31st of October, because I would only want to make promises that I know I can deliver. But
many of your Conservative colleagues, now Cabinet colleagues, are saying that they would block a no deal. So what happens if you come to a no deal?
Well, that's why the safest and quickest way to deliver Brexit is to choose someone who actually has a chance of negotiating a deal, and that's me.
Okay, now we're going to take people who are going to make their way to the microphones, but they haven't. Where are you?
Lady at the back.
Ah, at the back, excellent.
There are two reasons why I might consider voting for Boris, and I was just wondering if you had anything you could say about it.
What's your name, first of all, if I may?
Lindsay.
Lindsay, right.
Hello. The first one is that I haven't heard you guarantee that we will leave the EU by Halloween,
okay.
Which I think will prolong the issue for the nationalists who are using it, they're tagging onto it as a reason to leave the UK. And the second one is Boris is promising more spending, which in turn will, through the Barnett formula, give Scotland more money. So I just wondered if you could tell me why I would consider voting for you.
Well, thank you for the question, and I hope I can answer both of those points very clearly. So first of all, on the Halloween deadline, my birthday, by the way, is November the 1st. So it's a very, very important deadline for me for many reasons. And it's simply the reason that I gave to the previous gentleman who asked the question, which is that Parliament has succeeded in taking no deal off the table in March, and it will try to do so again. So if you guarantee that we will leave by the 31st of October, you have to be prepared to have a general election and change Parliament if Parliament frustrates your will. And I think it would be profoundly wrong and extremely dangerous for our party to go into a general election before we've delivered Brexit. I don't think you seek another mandate from the British people until you deliver the mandate that you were given the last time. And if you look at what happened in the local elections, the European elections, and indeed the Peterborough by-election, we'll get squeezed by the Brexit party on the right, the Lib Dems and the SNP on the left, and who would come through the middle? The Labour Party. And that would be one of the most dangerous things that we could possibly do. On the spending commitments, both Boris and I have made spending commitments, and you'll have a chance to ask him about his later. With mine, I've been very clear. Thanks to the very difficult decisions made by Conservative government, George Osborne, Philip Hammond, over the last 9 years, we have some headroom in our national finances to allow extra spending on things like defence, education, NHS, the social care system, and so on. But if there was a no-deal Brexit, I'm clear that those priorities would have to wait, because our first priority must be to help businesses that are affected by sudden introduction in tariffs, the fish processing industry, the sheep farmers who would suddenly have a 40% tariff on lamb. They will have a sudden structural change. And someone who's run their own business and had to have those incredibly difficult conversations when you have to lay someone off who's worked really hard for you for many years, shown you enormous loyalty and dedication, but the market's changed and you just can't afford to keep them. I want to avoid those kind of conversations up and down the country if we possibly can.
And do we have any other contributions from any other questions from the floor? Now, there was somebody else had their hand up. Are you at the microphone? Yeah? I can't actually see that.
There's a lady just here. If you shout out the question.
Hello? No, if you come down the microphone, that would be great. If you make your way down to the microphone. Now, there was someone in the middle who had his hand up. Yeah. Well, if you would like to come down to the microphone here, that would be great. And is Michael Bull here? Michael, if you might like to go up to the microphone behind you, that would be helpful. We'll take the lady down here first, because you're there first. First come, first served.
Thank you.
If you could tell us who you are first of all.
Yeah, sorry. My name is Vissy Bolt. I'm the chairman of the St Andrews University Conservatives and also the secretary of the Scottish Young Conservatives. But as you might be able to tell from the accent, I'm not from this country originally. I'm from Australia, but I'm desperate to stay. I've lived in Surrey now and Belfast for the past 2 months and study at St Andrews, and I love this United Kingdom, so thank you for keeping it united. I would just love you to elaborate on the post-study work rights that you kind of brought up before, because I'd love to stay, and I was wondering if it was going to be easier post-Brexit or harder.
Thank you. Is your name Lucia, did you say?
Missy.
Missy.
Yeah.
Right, thank you. Well, Missy, I don't want to make policy on the hoof, but I want to give you an indication of what my sympathies are and the direction of travel that I think we should go in. And I do think that one of the very best things about our United Kingdom is that we attract the brightest and best students from all over the world. I think they add enormously, not just to our economy, but to our diversity, and they help our young people to have an international, global outlook. So I'm very sympathetic to the idea of being more generous with post-study work rights to enable you, if you can find a good job, to stay for longer. I think that would be good for you, but I think it'd be brilliant for us. So can I make that commitment that it's something I would look at very sympathetically?
But why can't you just say yes? Given that you already have extended this for several English universities, why can't you just say yes? We'll extend it to St Andrews, Edinburgh, Glasgow, Aberdeen, wherever.
Well, just because I think the way you make these policies is that you do need to look into the detail. And I think I'm being very clear with everyone here what I would like to do.
So would you like to extend it to Scottish universities?
Well, I would like it to be for the whole of the UK. This is not just for Scottish universities.
But at the moment it's just for English universities. Would you like to extend it to Scottish universities?
I would like, people like you to be able to stay for longer, because I think you make a great contribution to our country.
If you could just tell us your name and then ask your question.
My name is Annabelle. My question is around trust. And when you were Health Secretary, the kind of data basically you sold to artificial intelligence companies, what was the purpose of selling that data? And how did you safeguard the rights of NHS patients?
Okay, very good question. And I think what you're talking about is the collaboration between the Royal Free Hospital and DeepMind, which the Information Commissioner said was not being done in the right way, and pulled up the NHS, which happened when I was Health Secretary, so you're absolutely right to talk about that. And this is a very big challenge for doctors, because the opportunity with artificial intelligence, if you use patient data in a way that is wise, is to save literally thousands of lives, because you can look at the electronic health records that we have in the NHS, both in Scotland and England, and you can look at that information and you can learn things that would help you, for example, pick up the risk of a cancer before any symptoms are shown, help you to reduce the death rate for strokes and heart attacks and all that kind of thing. But you are absolutely right to use the word trust, because if NHS patients worry that data is being used without their consent in a way they didn't know about, in the end, people have to have control of their own medical data. And I was the first Health Secretary to say that although the law says the data belongs to the NHS, really it belongs to the patients. So we've got this brave new world, but we need to clarify to reassure patients that their data is going to be properly protected.
Does that answer your concerns, Annabelle?
Partially. I have friends who are psychiatrists, and they had patients coming up to them very worried that their data was being released. So I have concerns, frankly, by going to this great world of artificial intelligence, and actually it's really the doctors who are able to make the best judgment on a face-to-face meeting rather than artificial intelligence companies.
Okay, briefly.
Okay, well, I think we can get the best of both worlds on that, but I very much hear your concerns. And I'll just make one very final brief point. If we lose the trust of the public on this, we lose the chance to make the most extraordinary advances in medical science. So we obviously have to do a better job if people like you are worried. And in the UK, in England, I did set up a special post called the National Data Guardian to be the champion of the rights of patients in England with respect to how their data is being used to try and get that trust. But there's obviously more to do.
If Patrick Fee and Donald Nicholson could make their way to some of the microphones. Thanks, Annabelle. We'll take the next question from Michael Bowe.
Hello, Jeremy. Great to see you today. My name is Michael, and I am the chairman of the Scottish Young Conservatives. So I felt when I submitted my question today, I thought, right, let's move away from independence and Brexit, and let's talk about a domestic policy that will be affecting young people for generations to come all across the UK. And considering how difficult it is for young people to get on the housing ladder, how will you deal with the housing crisis and allow people to eventually own their own home?
Well, thank you, Michael. And this is a very important issue. It's devolved responsibility. But let me tell you what I want to do in terms of the responsibility for England, because it is so important. And maybe this is a policy that could be adopted in Scotland as well. Margaret Thatcher helped 1.5 million council house tenants get onto the housing ladder with a policy called Right to Buy. And in doing so, she made many of them Conservative supporters because she gave them a stake in our system. And that was a profoundly important change. I have a policy that will help 1.5 million young people who can't afford a deposit at the moment get onto the housing ladder. And the way that we'll do that is by gifting them land that already has planning permission, so that the only thing they have to finance from their mortgage is the actual building of a house. And in many places in England, actually, the land is the most expensive bit. And what happens at the moment is that the property developers buy the land and then they get their profits from the increase in value when they get planning permission. I want us to give planning permission directly as the state so that the benefits go to the young person. And I think this is a very, very important thing. But one other thing, I think it's about aspiration, but it's also about values. So the other thing that we have to show young people is that we will do the right thing on climate change, because that is a litmus test issue for young people as to whether we have the right values as a party.
Patrick Fee. Where are you, Patrick, up the back?
Thanks, Colin. Good evening, Mr. Hunt. Great to have you in Scotland. I hope that you'll be back soon.
Thank you.
I'm still an undecided voter, but I'm aware you make a number of strong points. My question is this: what policies can a Conservative Party, under your leadership, introduce to boost the Scottish economy and attract more Scottish voters to our party at Westminster?
Thank you, Patrick. Well, we Conservatives, as you saw from the number of hands that went up when asked who'd set up their own businesses, we are the only party that understands wealth creation. And we have to show that we have not just an economic mission, but a social mission as well. Because what we want is not just wealthy individuals, but a strong society. And what I want to do, I don't agree with President Trump on everything, but one thing that he's done very successfully is a package of tax cuts that have boosted the American growth rate. We're growing at 1.5%. America's growing at more than 3%. If we were growing at that American rate, we'd have an extra £20 billion to spend every year on our precious public services, or indeed on tax cuts for the lower paid, or whatever our priorities are. So what I will do for Scotland is dramatically improve our economic performance throughout the whole of the UK. I said I want to be the world's next Silicon Valley. I think that's a very big opportunity, but I'm also very clear that we need to do things like HS2, the third runway, that make sure that that prosperity is spread throughout the whole of the UK, and I'll take a giant step towards that by reducing corporation tax to just 12.5%. It's 19% now. That is one of the lowest rates in the world. But there is a country not very far away that did that, and it's Ireland. And when Ireland did that, their GDP per head, their national wealth per person, was about 25% less than ours. Now it's nearly 50% more. So if you power up business, you power up the economy, and you create the resources that help all of us, including our public services.
But how do you help existing businesses? I mean, just down the road, you're talking about a green Silicon Valley. Bifab can't get the contracts for offshore wind turbines, and people are losing jobs there. And that's the kind of industry you're talking about, and you can't even deliver those contracts to a local workforce.
Well, I don't know who is responsible for those contracts. I do think that the offshore wind industry has been a huge Scottish success story. In fact, when I was at...
But it's not delivering Scottish jobs.
Well...
not in the manufacturing sector. That's why people are out of work at Bifab.
Well, I don't know the details of that particular situation, but when I went to Aberdeen a month ago, someone pointed out the offshore wind farms. It was a meeting, actually, with the oil companies who were very keen that they were described not as oil companies, but energy companies, the new name. And they pointed out the wind turbines. And they said yesterday was a particularly windy day, and we got a quarter of the UK's electricity from wind, which was a record. And that is one of the great ways that we're reducing carbon emissions. I would love those jobs to be done by Scottish or British companies. And
so what could you do to deliver that, given that they're being built abroad?
Well, one of the ways is to have the lowest business taxes anywhere in the world, and I've just given you a great policy for that.
But it's actually delivering
that helps them to be competitive.
But it's actually delivering the contracts.
Well, you know, the way that you make us competitive is not by stopping foreign companies from bidding for important contracts. It's by making British companies competitive so that we win those contracts under our own steam.
Donald Nicholson, and then if John Holliday can make his way to a microphone, we might manage to squeeze him in. Donald?
Hi, good evening.
Where's Donald? Sorry.
He's over there,
Yeah.
behind
Hi,
the podium.
Hi. You have already answered this question in a format, but however, regardless of whether we have a deal or no deal Brexit, are you, as the potential leader of the Conservative and Unionist Party, prepared to face down the SNP and protect the integrity of the United Kingdom?
Yes, I am.
John, that was a quick answer. You don't often get quick answers from politicians.
Doing my
There
best.
you go.
Doing
He
my
even
best.
answered the question. John?
I think that's the nicest thing you've said to me all evening, Colin.
Yeah, don't get used to it.
Sorry, I'm a bit confused now. What is your plan for the survival of the Conservative Party after the post-Brexit general election? Does it include coalition with another party, for example, the Brexit Party, if necessary?
Well, thank you, John, and let me answer that question very directly. The only way to deal with the threat of the Brexit Party is to Brexit. And that is why it is absolutely essential that we deliver on that democratic commitment in the referendum. Once we have done that, providing we deliver the right kind of Brexit, as I say, an open, outward-looking, internationally minded, tolerant Brexit, then we will be able to go back to being the broad-based, centre-right party that has always been what the Conservatives have been at our best. And the way that we will win a majority without having to go into coalition with any other parties is to remember what has always been brilliant about our party. In the 1980s, we were a broad church that had around the cabinet table people like Geoffrey Howe and Norman Tebbit, very different characters. In the 1990s, we had Ken Clarke and John Redwood, very different characters around the same cabinet table. And we've always had in our party a radical tradition, the Thatcherite tradition, that reminds us that a great country sometimes needs to do radical and bold things, and a one nation tradition that reminds us that elections are won from the centre ground and we need to be compassionate Conservatives. And our genius as a party has been to remember that we need both traditions, because when we have both those traditions, we are absolutely unbeatable. And that's the Conservative Party I want to lead.
Thank you. Jeremy Hunt, thank you. That's all we have time for.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Next, we have a campaign video from Boris Johnson's campaign.
Nice to see you. Hello, good morning.
Hello.
Yes, of course you can. If I get in, we'll come out deal or no deal on October the 31st.
Good man, good man.
We'll do that.
Thank you very much.
Would that make you come back and vote
Yes,
Conservative again?
Yes.
That's the spirit.
Yes.
But we've got to have the courage to tell the people of this country that we can do it if we really want to. And that's the only way, actually.
And you're the only person that can do that.
A lot of teachers are telling me that they feel that the funding per pupil isn't high enough. We need more police out there, but sometimes I think we need and stop and search.
Yes.
Totally with you.
I'm scared because my daughter used to live in London as well.
Yeah.
She's at university.
Safe big city it was when I used to run it. I can tell you we got crime down by 20%. We got the murder rate down.
It's like Mr. Khan off, but it's not good.
But I also think we need to be supporting the wealth creators and the business sector, because otherwise you're not going to have the dosh to invest. Right. Cut some taxes and you'll get more money in. Would you normally think of yourself as a Conservative voter, would you say?
No.
No? Ever? Can I ask you a terrible question? Would you consider voting for me?
Yes.
If there is one lesson from that referendum of 2016, it is that too many people feel left behind, that they're not able to take part fully in the opportunities and success of our country. That's why now is the time to unite our society and unite our country, to build the infrastructure, to invest in education, to improve our environment, and to support our fantastic NHS, to lift everyone in our country, and of course also to make sure that we support our wealth creators and the businesses that make that investment possible. Now is the time for us to believe in ourselves and what we can do. And that's why I am standing to be leader of the Conservative Party. Thank you. Thank you. Good evening. Thank you very much. Good evening, everybody. My friends, good evening. Thank you very much. Good evening. Thank you so much. I've had an absolutely amazing afternoon here in Scotland. I've just been to the Govan shipyard, where I met a bunch of apprentices who were building HMS Glasgow. And it's a Type 26 frigate, and I must say I felt a surge of incredible pride, because as Foreign Secretary, I had been one of the sales force of BAE Systems, and I helped to do a deal with Australia. We were all briefed about what to say, but it took a lot of work. We went over to Australia, and they came to see us, and they did a deal by which we will sell a further 9 Type 26 frigates to Australia, which will mean there will be a stream of high-value, high-skill jobs here in this country in a contract that will last for decades and is going to be worth £14 billion. But of course, it wasn't me who brought that contract to this country. Of course not. It wasn't me. It wasn't any individual human being or group of human beings. It was an institution that made that deal possible. It was the most successful political partnership of the last 500 years that made that deal possible. It was the Union, the UK. It was our common commitment. It was our common commitment to the defence of our country that means that brilliant Scottish kids are growing up to make fantastic machines that we are selling, that we are using to help to defend and protect our friends and allies around the world. And Australia has bought them. The Canadians have followed suit. They've already done it. New Zealand, we think, will come in. The American ambassador is going to the Govan shipyard, I think, in the next few days. Obviously, we've got to put the hard word on Donald Trump to come through and buy some as well. And it is absolutely incredible to see how the Union, all 4 nations, are profiting from that alliance and that relationship. And so tonight, I want to salute everybody here, Scottish Conservatives, for what you're doing to uphold and protect that precious union, and the amazing job you have done in defeating those who had ripped our union apart. And I want to thank very much, I want to thank Ruth Davidson, and I want to thank all my Scottish friends and colleagues here from Westminster. I think we've got Douglas Ross is here, and Colin Clark, Ross Thompson. Congratulations on what you have done, and kicking out some of these illustrious members of the, or less than illustrious perhaps, members of the, with their various piscine names that you've ejected. And wouldn't it be a fantastic thing, by the way, if pretty soon, and I'm sure we'll find the right candidate, if pretty soon, when the election comes, not too soon obviously, but one day, we got ready to eject Wishart from Perth. Wouldn't that be a fabulous thing? Isn't it about time that we put the run into run rig, as it were, and got. I think that would be a famous thing, and it could happen. It was only 21 votes, wasn't it? We can do it. We can do it. And listen, that's why I'm here tonight. I'm here to tell you, yes, of course, our party nationally has been going through some grim times, and it wasn't spectacular that we managed to score only 9 points in the recent European elections. But my mission with you tonight is to explain how I believe we can turn that thing round. And the most important thing we can do now is to defeat the man who would work with Nicola Sturgeon to destroy our precious union, and who's perfectly reconciled, he says, to having another referendum in Scotland, and that man is, of course, Jeremy Corbyn, leader of the Labour Party. And we can beat him, my friends. And this is what we need to do to win. We need to do three things. First of all, we need to get Brexit over the line. Get it done. Come out of the EU by October the 31st. That is absolutely indispensable. Get this thing done. Get this thing done, and we can do a fantastic deal. And then, of course, we've got to get ready for a no-deal scenario, and you know, I don't think by any means that's where we will end up. We will do a great deal. We will have a protraction of the existing arrangements. We will suspend the money in a state of creative ambiguity over the talks until we get the deal that we want. We will look after it. We will take out the provisions on citizenship and pass those through the House of Commons in a supererogatory way. And at the same time, of course, we will prepare for no deal. And people say, look, this country isn't up to it. Do you think this country isn't up to it? Absolutely not. We can do it. We can do it. We are a great, great country. And people say the planes won't fly, and there won't be any clean drinking water, and there won't be any milk solids and glucose and whey to make the Mars bars on which our children depend. And I think that is absolute nonsense. And whatever happens on November the 1st, after we have come out, and I think, as I say, we'll get a great deal. Whatever happens, I prophesy confidently that there will be clean drinking water in Perth, and the planes will fly, and there will be ample supplies of glucose and milk solids and whey to make Mars bars, deep fried or otherwise, because where there's a will, there's a way, my friends. And we're going to get it done. And then once we've got Brexit done, and even before then, we're going to start remobilising and revitalising our party around the simple proposition of conservatism. And we're going to believe in our case again, in the moral case for conservatism, which is that we understand that you have to support the wealth creators, the enterprises, the businesses of this amazing country, because that is the way to generate the income that we're always going to need to pay for the poorest and neediest, for fantastic public services, for a health service, for all the infrastructure that we want to put in. And that is how we will fund, and you will see in my plans already, I hope, we will fund an increase in education funding, we will fund more police out on the streets, full fibre broadband for this entire country, and take this amazing country forward and bring it together. Unite the UK in the way that I was proud to have united London. It's a very, very simple idea. One nation, modern, progressive conservatism. We can sell it again to the people of this country and bring them onto our side. And let's thereby make sure that we defeat the SNP and those who destroy our precious union. Let's prick the twin puffballs of the Brexit Party and the Liberal Democrats, who are feeding saprophytically on the sense of decay and trust in politics. Get Brexit over the line, and we win back all those tens, hundreds of thousands of voters, good people who will want to come back to us, and then let's wallop Corbyn for 6. And I remind you, with my concluding breath, that the last time I had to defeat a member of the London Labour left, considerably wilier than Jeremy Corbyn, we came from behind, and we beat him when we were 17 points behind. Our great party was 17 points behind Labour in London. We did it then, and with your help, we can and we will do it again. Thank you very much indeed for your attention, and I hope I can count on your support. Thank you.
I'm going to start with you, Mr. Johnson, exactly the same place as I started with your opponent on the Barnett formula.
Yes, sir.
Something you've spoken about in the past. What's your opinion of it in the future?
I think the Barnett formula must stay. And we must support our precious union, support it financially. And I hope very much, by the way, that the announcements that I have made so far about funding education, about putting more money into police, will be reflected by the SNP government in how they handle that increase in the block grant. Don't you think? If we're going to give them more funding for police, and I think it's absolutely vital that we get crime down, it's a basic hygiene for Conservatives, then I want to see them spending that money properly.
Well, crime is already lower in Scotland than it is in the rest of.
Well, I've just been
particularly in London, if you want to compare the two.
Well, if I may say so, that's entirely when I ceased to be mayor of London, I brought crime down, as I. Perhaps you're not aware of this, but I brought crime down by 20% and the murder rate down by 50%. And it is, in my view, a tragedy that the current Labour mayor of London has let the thing get out of control.
When in 2009 you described the Barnett formula as a kind of present from the English taxpayer, did you get it wrong then?
You're talking about a comment I made, I think, 10 years ago?
2009, yeah, absolutely.
There you go.
But you said it was a kind of present
you get
from the English taxpayer. So you got it wrong then and you've moved on.
And look, I'm making it absolutely clear to our friends here today that I'm here to defend and protect the Union, and I want to make sure that Scotland is properly funded, but I also want to make sure that we Conservatives invigilate that funding, as Scottish Conservatives are doing, and ensure that it is properly spent and not wasted. And I must say, you seem to be
so how would you
seem to be a supporter of the Labour Party. Well, no, I'm not saying that. You seem to be. You say that crime is lower in Scotland than it is in London.
Possibly partly because we have a higher proportion of police officers.
Well, I think that I've just been interviewed by a guy
your party here would claim that they contributed to
interviewed by a guy from the Scottish Daily Record who spoke of his newspaper's absolutely justified campaign about drugs crime and gang crime in Glasgow and elsewhere, and I thoroughly sympathise with him. And I think it's vital that we're not complacent about what is happening, that we recognise we have a problem in all our cities, and that we give the police the resources they need to fight it, and that's what I will do.
But not in Scotland, because you wouldn't have any power over that. When you came up with your tax plan...
That's not true. What we're proposing is to give... no, that's not true. We're proposing to give
would you
more
bypass
money.
the Scottish Government?
No, we're proposing to give more funding, and pro rata, that should amount to about 80 million for Scotland. If the SNP...
80 million?
80 million for policing. If the SNP choose not to spend it on policing, then I hope that people will notice that. And I hope that they will draw the relevant conclusions.
When you came up with your income tax plan, did you forget that Scotland had a different income tax regime?
Look,
Did you notice?
I want a government in the UK, and I want an administration across this country that does its best to keep taxes low for everybody, and particularly for those on low incomes. And I would remind you that when I was Mayor of London, we had a massive programme to expand the living wage, which went very well. It was then stolen by George Osborne in an act of theft I heartily condone, and became national policy.
But your proposals are for higher earners, and it would mean that Scots would pay an extra £3,000 in national insurance.
We will have a package that helps everybody, starting with the lowest paid, and that's the agenda.
But what about the Scottish element of that? Because we have a different income tax regime, it would mean that Scottish higher tax earners, earning between 50 and 80,000, would pay up to an extra £3,000 in national insurance, because you're putting up national insurance.
Well, we would have an overall package which would help everybody, but starting with the lowest paid. And of course...
So you're reversing your decision on that?
No, I think it entirely appropriate. But I'm curious that this has occasioned so much comment and dissent. But I think
I think if it's putting up people's national insurance, it's why.
Most people... We would obviously work to ensure that there was no such adverse consequence, but most people, I think, looking at the rates of taxation and looking at the way people on middle incomes, whether they are senior nurses or heads of maths departments or police inspectors, are drawn into the higher rates of tax, I think most people would think that was an entirely legitimate discussion for us as Conservatives to have. And if we do things as well to lift national insurance levels for those on lower pay, and if we champion the living wage, and if we put more money into the pockets of the poorest families in society with a high wage, high skill approach, which is what I would want, then I think it actually very reasonable that we should also look at the tax burden on those on middle incomes. And I wonder whether this audience agrees. Do you not think that we should be looking at the tax burden on people on middle income? I certainly think we should. It's an entirely reasonable thing to do.
What would be your top priority, Brexit or the Union? Which comes first?
My first priority is obviously the Union. And that would have been, I hope, obvious.
Would you say the same if someone in England asked you that?
And I tell you what, I think actually a great Brexit and a successful pragmatic Brexit can be a good thing, a wonderful thing to entrench and intensify the Union. I'll tell you why, Colin. I'll tell you why. The way to do it you come out of the whole UK comes out from the EU, and what does the SNP, the would-be destroyers of the Union, say then? Are they going to want to join the euro? Then are they going to say they want an independent Scotland to submit to the full panoply of EU law, including Schengen? Are they really going to campaign Scotland having just regained control of its fantastic fisheries? Are they going to campaign? Is the SNP going to say, okay, we've got a brilliant idea, we're going to hand back control of Scottish fishing to Brussels?
Are you saying...
I have to say, I don't think, with the best will in the world, I don't think that's much of a selling proposition. I've done a lot of campaigning. I wouldn't want to campaign on that ticket. Let's give our fish back to Brussels, says the SNP.
You're saying the Union before Brexit. Would you say that?
I'm saying the Union before Brexit,
an English
but
audience?
Brexit can entrench the Union.
Do you think that will attract Brexit voters back?
Yes, absolutely.
Do you think that will attract Brexit voters in England back?
Yeah, I think absolutely, because of course, because in my
Nigel Farage said just
experience,
yesterday that he was willing to sacrifice the Union effectively.
and that's why we're the Conservative Party, and that's why, and the Unionist Party, and that's why, and we don't, and we look, you know.
What about Section 30 order? Jeremy Hunt.
Well, they come to the same thing.
Never.
I'm afraid a Freudian slip, if I may say so.
It is. Jeremy Hunt says never, never, never. What do you say in Section 30 order?
Say again?
What do you say in a Section 30 order to give the powers to an SNP government to hold another independence referendum?
What I feel very strongly is that we had a referendum campaign in 2014, and we all, I think, took the same side in that campaign. I assume we did. I don't want to presume too much. I certainly passionately defended the Union because I believe in every fibre of my being. I think it's a fantastic institution. And, you know, as Foreign Secretary, I always
But on a Section 30 order, if they got a majority at Holyrood, would you give them
my view
a democratically elected government, if they got that?
My view is that we had a referendum in 2014 when the people of this country were promised. Hang on, let me finish this answer. They were promised that this was a once-in-a-generation choice they were making.
They were also promised to get a stay in the EU.
They were told it was a once-in-a-generation promise. I don't think there is any case for breaking that promise. Do you?
Well, what about if there's a democratically elected majority for it?
I think there is.
But what if there's a democratically elected majority for it?
We made a promise to the people of Scotland.
So you would ignore the democratic majority then?
Well,
if that was what it was.
I think there was a democratic vote by the people of Scotland, which was pretty conclusive, and I think it would be a great pity to
So you're ruling out a Section 30 order ever under your premiership? Would you rule it out?
It was made very clear at
Would
the
you rule it
time
out?
of the referendum
Jeremy
that
Hunt
it was
ruled it
a
out.
once-in-a-generation thing.
Would you rule it out?
I see absolutely no case for having a second referendum in Scotland.
Have you heard?
I think it's absurd.
You don't have, very briefly, you don't have the support of Ruth Davidson, you don't have the support of the majority of Scottish Conservative MSPs. Have you heard of Operation Arse?
I have a lot.
Have you heard of Operation Arse?
I have a lot of support from my friends in Parliament and indeed from friends in
But have you heard of Operation Arse?
I have.
What they planned to try and stop you becoming Prime Minister the last time, and it was quite successful then, perhaps less so now.
Well, I mean, Colin, you're the political analyst. I leave it to you to judge.
But it's,
leave it to you to judge the success of Operation.
It suggests what they think of you.
Well, you know,
does that bother you?
Not in the slightest. Not in the
Doesn't
slightest.
bother you that they called an Operation Arse after you?
I think that what I'm fortified by the knowledge that I have not only the support of some great Scottish colleagues who are here tonight, and I thank them very much at Westminster, but also it is a relevant consideration, my friends, that I have the support of more than half the parliamentary party, and it is growing the whole time at Westminster. So when it comes to the crucial work ahead of us, of getting Brexit done, of building a coalition across our party, uniting everybody, I think we're most of the way there, and I look forward to working with every supporters of every part of the anatomy when it comes to...
Let's not go there. That was a different session. I'm now going to open this up to the anatomy of the building. No. Stop, please. Just stop for your own sake. I'm going to try and...
Let me tell you, the body politic will come together to get this thing done. That's what we will do, and the hip bones...
Let's hear from some of the party members who are going to be voting in this election. First from Ken Lumsden. Where are you, Ken? If you make your way to the microphone at the back. Then from William Neal and from Chris Campbell Burkett. If you can make your way to microphones, I'll get to you eventually. Ken Lumsden, first of all, please.
Aye. While you and Jeremy may be able to unite the Conservative Party, how would you go about uniting the UK and, more pertinently, ensuring Scotland stays in the UK?
Well, thank you very much. But I think the first thing is to recognise that if we want to avoid a second Indie Ref 2, then we should have absolutely no truck with those who propose EU Ref 2. Because how can you oppose a second referendum in Scotland when, as some other candidates, I won't mention them by name, have actually suggested that there might be a case for a second referendum on the EU. You can't go down there. The second thing you've got to do, obviously, is entrench and strengthen the union. And one thing I feel very strongly is that we don't often celebrate enough those things that are achieved in Scotland, or indeed the other nations of the awesome foursome, that are the result of the UK. And that's why I placed the stress I did just now on the government shipyards, on those incredible high-tech jobs stretching out for years and years. The direct result.
They were quite annoyed they didn't get as many vessels in the contract as was promised.
Of the union. And actually, one of the interesting things that we're going to be able to do post-Brexit is go beyond ODU rules and look at ways in which we can actually encourage even more shipbuilding in government and by Scottish, incredibly high-skilled Scottish shipworkers. The other thing I would do is I would make sure there was a special unit in Downing Street to sense test and stress test every policy for the benefits it provides.
Does that mean you get rid of the Scottish Secretary?
Union? No.
Isn't that kind of their job?
No, there he is, in the front row. He's a good friend of mine.
And would he continue to be if you were Prime Minister?
There is no ejector seat under his chair. He will continue to...
Would you keep him?
Well, I'm not going to make any... It would be invidious to comment about any future cabinet.
We can't ask you. Would you keep him? He's sitting there.
You can ask whatever
You'd love to know.
You can ask whatever you like, but I think that any kind of commentary about the composition of my cabinet would come under the general heading of measuring up the curtains, and it would be seen as presumptuous, and I'm not going to do that. Final thing I'll mention about strengthening the union, although there are many things I think we should do. I think we should be running a couple more things. I think we should be running a proper advertising campaign about the incredible achievements of the union. You know, let's face it, since 2014, one side of the argument, the defeated side of the argument, defeated by a mile, have kept up their chorus of complaint and kept up insisting that the union should be broken up. And actually, we've slightly let the argument go by default, and we haven't fought back. And I think we should. We who believe in the union should do something to champion it. And we should use the government. The government spends £500 million on advertising. So £500 million on advertising. Let's use some. There's a very good campaign called the Great Campaign. Right. Let's use some of that to champion the union. Last point. Sorry about giving a long answer. It was a very good question. Last thing that we should do, I propose that if I'm successful in this election, I will not only be Prime Minister and First Lord of the Treasury, but also Minister for the Union, because I do think that it should be the responsibility of the Prime Minister to uphold the single most important and successful political institution, political union that I've seen in history. So I will do that as well.
How did you feel when you saw that poll that suggested that 63% of your membership who were polled were willing to sacrifice the union for Brexit?
Well, you know...
Ruth Davidson said they had to have a long, hard look at themselves. Did you answer it?
I'm a big fan of Ruth Davidson, and I admire very much what she's done here in Scotland. all I can say is that I think most conservatives that I've spoken to are passionate believers in and defenders of the union. And I'll tell you why. I'll tell you why it matters so much. Because if you go around the world and you talk to people who love and admire this country, and they do, by the way, far more than we give credit for at the moment. If you talk to people who admire the UK, it's not because they particularly love England or Northern Ireland or Wales or even Scotland. It's because of the whole and because of the British values that we collectively incarnate and because of the red, white and blue flag that flies over our brand.
Does anyone
that's what they recognise and respect, and everything that goes with the concept of the UK.
Does anyone still respect the UK after Brexit, after the vote, after the way you've handled it since?
By the way, they
do they?
They do. Actually, interestingly, the further you get from London, the more recognition and respect there is for the desire of a country to govern itself. And the more you find...
Are you making the SNP's argument there?
No.
Sounded like it.
I think that this is our country. This is the UK. And I think that people around the world admire the UK, and what they want to see is the UK standing up for itself. And I think actually over the last 3 years, they've been a bit baffled by the note of defeatism that has crept in to our politics. And what they want to hear, and I've heard it time and again. I've heard it in the Gulf, I've heard it in Africa, I've heard it in India, I've heard it. They say, you're the UK. You can do this. They believe in us. We should believe in ourselves as well. And now's the time.
Okay.
Absolutely true.
William Neal. Are you William? And then Chris Campbell-Burkett. Where is Chris? Chris, if you can make your way to the microphone at the back, please. William.
Good evening, Boris. Welcome to Scotland.
Thank you, sir.
Regarding Brexit, when do you actually think we will leave? Please don't say the 31st of October.
Well, you give me no option.
Excuse me, let me finish.
Let him finish. You interrupt me, Lidl. Don't interrupt him.
I'm sure most of us in here are wanting to leave. The key thing is we've been trying for nearly 3 years to achieve this. What makes you think that you can do it in 3 months and goodwill and things like that there and bluster won't achieve it? We all want to leave, but 3 months is not feasible.
Do you think he can do it?
I don't think anyone can do it in 3 months, even with the best of intentions. I just really want to know, when do you really think we can leave? Let's set a plan forward so that we can actually take the steps. We can't take those steps in 3 months, I don't believe. But let's tell everybody the truth.
He doesn't believe
we want to leave.
Okay.
It's not that I don't believe. Sorry, it's not that I don't believe Boris. I'm sure Boris is full of good intentions. I just think it's not feasible.
Right.
We've been trying for 3 years. We can't do it in 3 months.
Okay, well, perhaps thank you so much for your question. I think actually the problem has been really that the UK has devised its own incarceration with this withdrawal agreement that is deeply, deeply inadequate and would leave us imprisoned both in the customs union and in the magnetic pull of EU law, even though we were outside the EU. And that's been the basic problem. And I think the UK has not really tried to leave, is I'm afraid the awful truth. We haven't really tried to get out in the way that the people mandated us to do. And I think the difference between now and here in early July and March the 29th is that politics has totally changed. And people in the House of Commons can see that MPs on both sides, both main parties, can see that unless they get this thing done, unless they deliver on the will of the people, we face electoral extinction. And that is the reality. And that is what has changed. And so, you know, the obstacle to leaving is not some practical problem to do with preparedness to get out of the EU. We were actually ready on March the 29th. It was just, of course, that the House of Commons opposed. And
you opposed?
Actually, I voted for the deal, if you remember. And Mrs. May couldn't get her deal through. And that has, I think, now fundamentally changed. People understand that unless we get this thing done, both the Labour Party is on 18 points in the polls. You know, they're not doing much better than us, quite frankly. I know it's superhuman incompetence by Corbyn. We're barely in the early 20s. And unless we get it done, we will face long-term destruction at the hands of parties that are making hay with our inability to get Brexit over the line.
But again, quite a few of your members said they were willing to accept that in return for Brexit.
And may I, no, I don't think that's true at all.
Well, quite a lot of them did. Around 60-odd% said that in the same poll.
No, I think what Conservative Party members want is for our party to come together and get Brexit done. And that is the right thing to do. And it will be a huge relief to politics in this country when we do it. And I just on your point, where we are technically, as I'm sure everybody really understands, is that the EU has granted us an extension until October the 31st, by when we must leave by law, unless the UK asks for a further extension. So the momentum is with exit. We are going to leave on October. The only thing that could stop us would be if Parliament decided by some means or other to insist on the government
because there's no majority
for a further
no deal there,
extension. And I think, and I'd get back to my central point, I think that actually when it comes down to it, MPs will seize their responsibilities with great maturity. They triggered Article 50. They all accepted that we were going to come out, and I think we will get it done. And it will be a great success, and we will move on. And we as a party will come together, north and south of the border. We will come together, and we will deliver some fantastic things for our country. And that is the way forward. So I think, if I may say so, there is no reason why we should not come out on October the 31st, rather than any future. There's nothing further we have to get ready by October, by November, the end of November or Christmas or whenever. That's simply untrue. We can be as ready as we can possibly be by October the 31st to come out on WTO terms. It won't make much difference. We can do everything in our power.
And if you put it on the side of a bus, people might believe it.
To support our agriculture industry, to support just-in-time supply systems, and all the rest of it. And it's vital that we do that, so that our EU friends and partners look us deep in the eye and they think, these guys really mean it. They want to leave.
You just mentioned the agriculture industry. You just mentioned the agriculture industry. Did you get the letter from the National Farmers Union of Scotland this week, which said no deal is simply not an option for them?
And
did you get that? Did you read it?
I got another letter from the National Farmers Union of Scotland. I wrote back saying that we would make up the difference, the shortfall in funding that Scottish farming has experienced as a result of receiving lower than average per hectare payments.
What about a no-deal Brexit? They say it would destroy the industry.
I haven't seen that letter, but I mean...
We sent it to you this week.
We will,
but I'm putting the contents of it to you now. They say that would destroy their industry, push them out of business.
Actually, I don't think that is true. But we would prepare every sector of industry. And by the way,
in 3 months, that's the point that William's making. He says you can't do that in 3 months.
On the contrary, a huge amount of work had already been done over the last 3 years. It may have escaped your notice, but it was the policy of the government for 3 years to prepare for no deal. Perhaps that seems to have slipped the mind of various illustrious members of the cabinet, and a huge amount of work has been done to prepare both the agriculture sector, the just-in-time supply chains, to get everything ready. But financial services, aviation, a huge amount of work has already been done. But I stress, and there are some people who actively want no deal, right? I mean, there's Mervyn King.
Sometimes it sounds like you do.
No.
Sometimes it sounds like it.
When?
Well, when you're talking, generally.
No, I don't think so. I've made it absolutely clear that I want to come out with a protraction of the existing zero tariff, zero quota arrangements, and I think that the best solution is for us to solve the problems of the Northern Irish, backstop where they and solve the issue of frictionless trade across the Northern Irish border, which is of course a proxy for the solution to all border checks in whether it's at Calais or Rotterdam or wherever. You can do all that, but you should do it where it logically belongs.
You haven't told anyone how.
No, well, there are all sorts of ways you can check for rules of origin.
They're waiting to hear.
For contraband, for smuggling, away from the border. and this is accepted not just by
you don't really seem to have a solution there, do you?
But on the contrary, there are abundant facilitations that
But
can
you
be
haven't told
produced.
us what they are.
Yeah, there are checks you can do away from the border to verify that people are not smuggling or breaking the law. That is what you do. And that means that you do not, under any circumstances, need to have a hard border in Northern Ireland. And the reason this whole issue has been escalated into such a sort of political taboo is because the intention, I'm afraid...
You'd have to convince the EU as well.
Both of the Commission and of the Treasury has been to keep us locked in the customs union and effectively in the single market, even though we've come out.
Okay, and let's take some more questions.
Unless we're willing to come out on October the 31st, we will not be able to begin the work of doing free trade deals, of setting a new immigration policy, and of solving the problems of...
Gentlemen here, if you'd like to make your way to the microphone. Gentlemen there, if you could go behind Chris. Anybody else? Lady at the front, yeah, if you'd like to make your way across there. And a young man there, if you'd like to go to the microphone up the back. Right, Chris Campbell-Burkett, please.
Chris in Glasgow. You've largely covered a lot of this, Mr Johnson, but with the obstacles to Brexit negotiations perpetually portrayed in a poor light or hampered by the EU's policies of divide and rule, or constraint by treaty more like, bogged down by civil servants, swamped by parliamentary tactics, for 3 years this has not supported the referendum result. And even you having to vote for Mrs May's surrender treaty, what evidence demonstrates the determination to overwhelm these adversarial forces and to promptly complete Brexit?
I think that the incentive we have is the annihilation that we face if we don't do this. And, as Dr. Johnson said, depend upon it, sir, nothing concentrates a man's mind so much as the knowledge that he may be hanged in a fortnight. That is, we have a powerful incentive to get this done. We're looking at the hemorrhage of Conservative support to other parties, and it's also our moral duty to get it done. We asked the people what they thought. They gave us their answer. We promised to implement it. We haven't done so for 3 years. It's a basic point of democracy. And let me tell you something. All those who say that it's impossible to survive no deal, all those who raise all these bureaucratic and technical obstacles, do you know what? I think they are really, in many, many cases, perhaps not all, but in many cases, their real agenda is to keep us in the EU.
You seem more concerned about the annihilation of the Conservative Party than what the farmers' unions say would be the annihilation of their industry with a no deal. You seem to be getting your priorities wrong for somebody who wants to be Prime Minister.
No, I've made it very clear that we will have abundant protection for...
But are you putting party before country here?
And
are you putting party before country?
Well, the country has voted to leave the EU, and we must honour the will of the people. And by the way, if we do have to come out without a deal, don't forget, Colin, that in addition to the funds that we have, the fiscal headroom we currently have, there will be £39 billion that we will be able to quarry to help the farming community and many others to deal with the consequences of a no deal.
You wouldn't get the full 39 million. You still have to pay some of it legally, wouldn't you?
Well, there will be an awful lot of money
half
that
of
we'll
it.
be able to use to palliate and to help the agriculture community and many others with going out on WTO terms. And by the way, just so you get my point, there are some who think that coming out on WTO terms would be a fact. Mervyn King, the former governor of the Bank of England, at least as erudite in economics perhaps as you, Colin,
far more,
thinks that it would be a massive boost to British GDP and that we'd rake in 35 billion euros in tariffs on EU products coming into our country.
Unfortunately for you, the current government doesn't agree with him.
I don't want to go down that route, but all I'm saying to you, and I'm absolutely certain of this, that those who prophesy doom and those who underestimate the UK's resilience are getting it badly wrong. We can get this thing done, we must get this thing done, and we will come through very well indeed.
Next question from the woman there. If you tell us who you are.
Good evening. The microphone's a bit low for me, I'm afraid. My name is Flora. I'm undecided, but leaning Boris. But one thing gives me pause, and it's this question. Does a good Prime Minister need to be a loyal husband and father?
No. You know, well,
Good question.
Well, thank you. I thought you'd like that one, Colin.
It's a change for me and Dale.
Yeah, look, I think that on these sorts of things, I've been asked all sorts of questions the last 20, 30 years, and I just don't comment on that stuff, if that's all right, because I think what the people in this country want to hear is what my plans are to get Brexit over the line, what I'm going to do to unite our country, and the ideas I have for a fantastic agenda of modern conservatism. And I really think we should, if I may respect, that's what we need to focus on. Our party is too down in the dumps, too gloomy at the moment. We have a fabulous... Corbyn is possibly the weakest opponent still that I've seen in my lifetime. And how we managed not to hit the ball back in the net last time, I've no idea. But he is, you know, he's a guy who would put up taxes on just about everything, on inheritance, on pensions, on income to 50%, he'd have the highest corporation tax in Europe, he'd tax gardens, as I've just...
Let's ask Flora if that helps her at all.
Well, I don't know where I asked about Corbyn's tax policy there.
Well,
if you choose not to comment on it, then you're just going to have to let us doubtful voters come to our own conclusion, and it may not be a favourable one, I'm afraid.
Then I'm going to have to live with that, because all I can say... all I can say is that I think actually what people want to hear is my agenda for getting out of the EU, bringing our party,
but they also want to know if they can trust
together.
Flora wants to know if she can trust
Flora, okay, well, Flora, let me put it this way.
As an individual,
let me put it this
going to lead the country.
Let me put it this way. When you look at what I've done in politics and what I promised to do to any electorate that has hired me, I have always exceeded expectations. And when I was Mayor of London, we outbuilt Ken Livingstone in terms of affordable housing. They thought we could never do 100,000 homes. We did. We cut crime by about 20%. We cut the murder rate by 50%, far more than people thought was possible. There were about 4 or 5 years, Flora, when we were running fewer than 100 murders in London, because we got out there and we backed the police and we gave them the political cover to do what was necessary. No, I'm going to talk about... No, this goes to character, and this goes to whether you stick by what you promise. And if you look at what we did with... I said I would stop people's delays on the tube, and it was incredibly difficult, but we did. We actually cut delays by 30% on the London Underground. We did a huge range of things. I promised I would deliver a fantastic Olympics, and I think by common consent we did. As I say,
well, you're not going to answer Flora's direct question.
Flora has asked...
Well, you're not going to ask Flora's direct question
Flora
about your own character.
Flora has
and it's a question that people across the country have asked about your character.
I know, and I'm giving you
and you're not going to answer it.
I'm giving you my answer, which is if you...
I'm giving you my answer,
I'm giving you my answer, which is that if you want...
You're giving Flora your answer.
If you want to look at... well, you keep interrupting me.
You never get to the end.
Well, if you look at what I say I'm going to deliver and what I deliver, I say I will do X, and normally speaking, we deliver X plus 10 or 20 or possibly more. I'll give you one final...
Well, let's take more questions from the membership. Let's take the question from the gentleman at the back.
Hi Boris, my name's Ryan and I would be considered a young Conservative. I'm 18, joined the party last November, and I come from the constituents Rutherglen and Hamilton West, which is controlled by Labour in Westminster and SNP in Holyrood. So my question to you would be, what is your plan to make the Conservative Party more appealing to young people?
Thank you. And I think that's a crucial question. Well, first of all, you need high-wage, high-skilled jobs. And it was fantastic, as I say, to see the jobs that are being created in government this afternoon. But you also need to give young people the hope that they can have a share of their home, or the value of their home, or buy their own home. And at the moment, there are too few young people who think that they've got that chance because they have massive student debts, and we need to think about that. I think the interest rate that's currently being charged is excessive, and it should be brought down. And we need to be getting young people to understand what I mean by the moral case for conservatism, which is that it is if you have a stake in our society through home ownership, you will, I think, be more likely to be happy, to be prosperous, and to have what you want in life. And that is something that I think too many young people now feel excluded from by the way the property market works. And we need to be building more good quality homes that are actually affordable for young people. And you can do it, and you can do it without destroying greenfield sites. And I've done, as I say, hundreds of thousands in London by improving transport infrastructure. The critical thing to unlocking brownfield sites is good transport infrastructure. And when I was mayor, we did many tens of thousands of homes by extending the tube, by improving transport. Go on.
Okay, right.
The other thing is the environment.
I've got another two questions here. If Sandra Skinner can get to a microphone. Gentleman here first.
Right. Good evening.
Tell us who you are.
Lockie Spearman. Boris, while you may have charisma in spades, my question is, can we trust you to lead this country when you have so many times have stories of you being untrustworthy in both private and public life?
Well,
it's not like groaning at your own party members.
No.
Groan at me, but don't groan at them.
No, groan at me. Look, I want to go back to the answer I gave before. If you look at, if you look at, there is no. I'll give a reason why I think these arguments are made, and that is because I think that many sections of the media and of the UK establishment were very surprised by the result of the Brexit referendum. And for one reason or another, I was identified as one of the leaders of that campaign. And a huge effort was made during the course of that referendum campaign to play the man, not the ball. And that was how it was decided the government would, and others.
Is there any more in the Sunday papers this week? Anything to look forward to? Anything to dread?
That campaign, and they made a huge fuss. Particularly, I think you're talking about the bus of which had the famous figure of 350 million written on it. So actually, that is the correct figure, or it was at the time. Actually, by 2021.
Hang on. Let's go back. Let the gentleman come back briefly.
I'm talking about public life, Boris, as well as private life. And you avoid the question, as always.
Well, which pub? Well, go on, give me a...
Oh, you were sacked from newspaper jobs for lying.
Lying?
Max Hastings says that.
On various occasions.
Like what?
Max Hastings said he sacked you because you lied.
I can go through a whole series of them, but I don't propose to.
Just answer very briefly, and then we'll move on.
But you're not... You tend to fib when you get into a corner.
There you go. He says you're a fibber.
Anyway, I don't think you've produced, as it were, chapter and verse. I think the most common allegation is about the £350 million that was on the side.
Well, you've addressed that. So let's move on to the next gentleman.
Well, all right.
You've talked about the bus. You've talked about the bus. He's asking about other things.
Would you let me just make a supplementary point, if I may, to the audience, Colin, which is that actually what we told about, what I said about the UK contributions was no more than the round unvarnished truth. That is the sum, £350 million, that the UK does not control. Okay. About half of it, as I said about 1 billion times, as you will have heard me,
and you have.
Referendum campaign,
You've said it 1 billion times.
Let's move on. No, but this is meant to be evidence of.
Well, but you're not answering the question the way you want to.
And actually, the point I'm coming to is if we ever had to do it again, we would need a bigger bus because the true figure.
You could always paint one in your spare time.
The true figure is
you could paint on a wine box in your spare time.
No, the truth, was he quite as interrupting of the last chap?
Yes. Yes.
Was he?
I'm trying to move on to the gentleman over there because we're very nearly out of time and I'd quite like to get him in.
The true figure is going to be nearer to 420 million.
Can we get the last gentleman in?
Can you hear me all right?
Yes, please carry on.
I'm Steve Mannion. I'm just a foot soldier for the Conservative Party. Don't hold any office. But my question is, Boris, The present Chancellor has implied that your promised financial plans are unaffordable. What's your response to these claims?
Well, I don't think he's actually said that.
No, he has.
Well,
I think he has.
Yeah, quite clearly, quite specifically.
Has he? Well, there is, as you know, there's fiscal, what I think he gave a general speech saying that we had to be fiscally prudent, and I agree with that. And I pledge as Prime Minister to keep bearing down on debt and to keep reducing our national debt. But there is, I think everybody will acknowledge, there is fiscal headroom. There is about £26 billion of fiscal headroom. And it is, I think, right at this time to start making some crucial investments for our country and our society. And I would single out education. I've mentioned the police. I've talked about full fibre broadband for the whole country. And is that not a good thing to do? I think we should. And I don't think even my good friend the Chancellor, well, I think he does oppose it, but he's wrong. We should be accelerating the full fibre rollout. We could speed it up by at least 8 years, and it would be a great thing for our country. And the cash is there. It can be spent without doing damage to our finances, and we should get on and do it.
Inevitably, you've gone over time.
Well,
so we're going to have to stop there.
Thank you very much.
Because they've got to get back and see the highlights of the tennis and see how Andy Murray did in the doubles. We've only had singles here tonight, but if you'd like to thank both your candidates.
Thank you very much.
One of them is still here.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye. Thank you.
And thank you all for your questions as well. As I predicted, they were much tougher than mine.